Before the end of the year, I'm going to design and publish my very first Shadowdark adventure, sharing the entire process as I go, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That way, if you ever decide to publish an adventure for yourself, hopefully you can benefit from some of the insights and resources I gather along the way. Hey folks, I'm William, this is RuneForged, welcome to the channel. If you'd like some additional context for this challenge, go ahead and check out the playlist linked down in the description. In a previous video, I generated some ideas for some of the monsters and encounters the PCs might face in this adventure. And today we're going to take some of those ideas and turn them into gameable material, focusing on monster design. For those who might have missed the previous video, the premise of this adventure is that several local villagers have been captured by a cult dedicated to the dark god Ramlaat, who plan to convert the strongest villagers using sinister mind-controlling magic while sacrificing the rest. So it looks like we're going to be designing a lot of cultists today. As a general guideline, we're going to try to use or reskin existing monsters whenever possible. That way we can make it as easy on ourselves as we can, while also trying to ensure some level of balance. Also, because this adventure is kind of being tuned as a level 1 starter or introductory adventure for Shadowdark, there may be some cases where we lower the overall power of kind of your more standard monsters to make it a more accessible play experience. But we're going to transfer some of that power off of the standard enemies, and we're going to move that over onto the various different boss fights that we're going to see in this adventure. That way we can hopefully create some really exciting and memorable encounters that'll make new players want to come back for more in the future. All right, so here we are in the Excel document. You don't have to do this process in Excel. In a lot of ways, it would probably be faster to kind of design like in your final document, like whatever you're going to be using for your final layout. But I kind of like to do this step just to get kind of an idea of the relative different power levels of the various different creatures in the adventure, and kind of make sure that I'm being consistent in how powerful those creatures are, and also like helps me measure up like how difficult various different encounters might be versus a different encounter in the adventure. So hopefully this spreadsheet is pretty intuitive, but basically in here in column B, I've just got a list of the various different creatures that I brainstormed in a previous video, kind of based on the different dungeon rooms that we had thought up for the adventure. On the left-hand side there in column A, you can see the approximate level that I think that these creatures should be to pose a reasonable challenge to our level 1 characters. And then across the top, you see the various different statistics here: AC, hit points, attacks, all that stuff. The only thing that might stick out here is column C, which is the monster base. And this kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier. I'd much rather reskin or modify an existing creature rather than create one whole cloth. Again, I just find it easier, and I think it'll make it easier for us to balance monsters and encounters overall if we start with something existing and then make minor modifications on top of that. All right, so starting with the Neophyte, these are kind of going to be our basic kind of minion cultists. So we want these guys to be really weak, both in terms of their defensive and offensive capabilities. So basically all I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up the Shadowdark rules, and I'm going to try to find some level 0 creatures that might provide a good baseline for this stat block. So hold on with me just a minute while I try to find a good creature. All right, so I was able to flip through the Shadowdark rulebook and find a creature that I thought was an okay start for the Neophyte creature. I settled on Kobold, even though it's not perfect, mostly because it's like one of the few level 0 creatures that is also kind of humanoid. So I thought this might be the easiest base to work off of. So we're just going to go right down the line here and see what things might need to be changed. So looking at the column D here for armor class, the Kobold by default has an AC of 13, which I think is a little bit high for our Neophytes. I imagine these as kind of average humans, physically speaking, so they're probably not going to have this rather large +2 dex bonus. And I don't think that they're going to be wearing the leather armor that kobolds usually come equipped with. I think these guys are just going to be kind of standard humans, or humanoid opponents, and their only armor, so to speak, is going to be the very simple robes that they wear, which are not going to offer them any sort of armor bonus. So I think that we're actually going to take this down to 10. And then I think that'll be good for now. In terms of hit points, I think 1 is absolutely perfect. I think if any of the PCs ever hit one of these neophytes, they should go down, no problem. So I think 1 is the correct number of hit points. All right, so number of attacks looks good. Attack bonus, I think, is right on the money. I don't think we want these guys to have like a really high chance to hit. I don't necessarily want to go negative. I think just a flat D20 roll is probably fine. In terms of damage, the kobold comes with a spear, I think, which is D6 damage. I think we actually want to bump this down to a D4. Again, we want these guys to be kind of minionish. We want to be able to kind of swarm, quote unquote, our characters with these guys if possible and still give them some chance of survival. And I just want to reiterate, like, I know that we are probably going to be weakening a lot of these kind of minion and standard monsters, but I promise you we are going to be transferring some of that power over to the boss encounters in this adventure. So it will still provide quite a bit of challenge for low-level adventurers. All right, moving over to the strength here. I don't think that these cultists are particularly weak. I think that they're just going to have a standard +0 modifier. Again, I'm just imagining these as kind of standard low-level humanoid opponents. So I think a strength modifier of 0 is fine. I think we're going to do the same thing for dexterity. Con is fine. I do think that in general, these cultists, especially these low-level cultists, probably are not particularly intelligent, wise, or charismatic. Otherwise, I think they would probably be higher level than they are currently. So I think we're going to go ahead and change this wisdom to a -1 as well. And I think that rounds out the baseline statistics quite nicely. Now, the kobold also has a special ability called dodge. And let me just double check to make sure that I'm getting the word correctly. Yeah, so dodge once per day, an attack that would hit misses instead. Now, I'll be honest, I think this ability is really cool and very kind of thematic for like small, agile creatures. But one, I don't think that it fits on our kind of cultist and neophyte monsters. And two, I just don't really want to keep track of dodge mechanic, especially for a creature that's going to be showing up in large quantities. We might end up using that ability for one of our boss monsters later in the adventure, but I think we're going to go ahead and just remove it from our neophyte for now. And I don't really feel the need to replace it with anything right now. Again, these are kind of meant to be just kind of low-level, nameless, faceless enemies that we can hopefully swarm our characters with. And I don't really want to be trying to keep track of any sort of ability for these monsters, because I think it'll add a bunch of unnecessary bookkeeping, and we can create much more exciting abilities on other monsters in the adventure. So I'm not really worried about making these guys special or unique in any way. Oh, and something else I wanted to talk about before we go much further. I have also gone through, like before the video today, and I've gone on TTRPG looking for some cool kind of black and white stock art that we might be able to use for some of these different monsters. And I'll put up on the screen what I want to use for either like the Neophyte or the Acolyte, because I think it's some really cool art. And I'll also put a link down in the description of the video where you can pick up that art for yourself if you want to use it in one of your own projects. And we'll be doing that for a couple of the monsters that I was able to find some cool art for. So I'm really excited about that. I think it is really a good idea to kind of go look at art, like kind of in tandem with your brainstorming process, because you may want to modify some of your ideas so that it more closely represents the art that you have chosen to represent whatever character that you're building out. So I thought that was an interesting thing to note, and I almost did it a little bit too late in the process, but luckily I remember just before I started actually doing any hardcore design work, so I was able to make some modifications of some of these monsters, again, to make it fit more in line with what the art represented. So little note there. All right, next let's take a look at the Acolyte. And this is kind of like a higher level or more elite cultist compared to the Neophyte. And I want these Acolytes to be more of a one-to-one challenge for the PC. So I went through and I tried to find an appropriate level 1 monster to kind of base these guys on. And I was looking for something that was kind of like a little bit of a bruiser. And I think that the Thug stat line does a really good job of kind of representing the type of creature that Acolytes are. All right, so just taking a look at the armor class here, it is 13, and that is coming... Where is that even coming from? Hold please. Leather armor plus shield. Okay, gotcha. Makes sense. So I think this is a little bit higher than what I want these cultists to have. I don't see them really carrying around shields per se. I think they're basically just in robes and some leather armor, and they're probably just using like a short sword or something. So I don't think that they're going to be using shields. So we're going to go ahead and bump this down to 11 AC after we get rid of the shield. The hit points of 4, I think, is perfectly reasonable. I think that's kind of like the average for a first level monster. Number of attacks 1 seems good. Attack bonus of 1 seems reasonable. Again, it's a step up from our kind of lower level Neophyte, so I think that's fine. Damage is a D6 instead of D4, which again I think is also reasonable. Move is here, that's fine. They are a little bit stronger than Neophytes, so I'm on board with that. I'm wondering if maybe I want to give them an additional point of dexterity, which would again also bump up their armor class. But I think this is fine. I see them as more kind of like thuggish brutes than any sort of like finesse type of character. So I think this is fine for now. I would be tempted to bump up their constitution, but I'm also very aware of, I think that the difference between 4 and 5 hit points is actually pretty significant at low levels. And I do want to make these guys killable in a single, like kind of a single average hit for a high powered weapon, like a D8 damage weapon or higher. So I think that 4 and actually even 3 would probably be maybe more appropriate. But I think for right now, we're just going to keep the kind of baseline 4 HP, and we're going to see how it plays out at the table. All right, so kind of looking at these mental stats here. I do think that these Acolytes are probably a bit higher on the mental side of things. So I'm actually just going to bump all of these. I'm going to bump intelligence and charisma up by 1, and I'm actually going to up wisdom by 2. Or I guess we can just keep it at what the base thug level is. I think these guys are probably a little bit more perceptive than their Neophyte counterparts, so I think that is quite reasonable. The thug doesn't have any sort of special abilities, which again is fine with me because I plan on running the Acolytes in fairly large numbers, and I don't really want to keep track of any sort of special abilities for these guys. Again, we will bring those cool things back in on more impactful and higher level enemies so that we're still getting some cool variety, but we're not overwhelmed with abilities on stuff that we're going to be running high numbers of. So that's my thought process. All right, so I went through and I just went ahead and did Hunter off screen because it's not really any different from the process that we've gone with the first 2 creatures. I want these guys to be roughly on par with kind of the Thug or with the Acolyte characters because they're basically the same rank of cultists, but I gave them more of a hunter-y kind of ambushy vibe because they're going to be out there like hunting like prey down, so I want them to be a little bit more stealthy, and I also gave them the ambush ability that comes with the bandit monster by default. So I made a couple minor tweaks, but it's basically just the default bandit with some minor modifications. And then after that I did the starving Mastiff, which is basically just going to be a slight variation on the Mastiff from the core rules. I don't think I changed hardly anything about the stat block, but I did add some additional abilities. So when I'm thinking about this creature and what kind of role it's going to serve in the adventure, I wanted to emphasize kind of the cruel nature of these cultists and how they kind of starve their animals to make them more bloodthirsty when it does come time for them to be involved in some sort of conflict. So I wanted to create kind of this mechanic that kind of reinforced that kind of theme or idea. And I added something what we're going to call the starving ability. And this is basically the mechanism by which PCs can kind of gain the loyalty and affection of these creatures if they want to. And maybe, maybe they can become pets, or maybe they're just going to use them in combat against the cultists, or maybe some sort of distraction or whatever have you. And I'm not too concerned right now about the precise wording of these abilities. I'm going to wait and save that till we're actually working in the kind of the final like document layout thing that we're going to use, because I think we're going to have to do quite a bit of editing if we try to write it. If we try to do the design work outside of the final product, we're just gonna have to go back and rewrite it and like make it smaller probably to get it to fit. So we're gonna worry about the specific wording later. But for right now, all I need to know is that basically like these things are gonna attack whatever is easy for them to attack, because they need food to survive, and they're also going to be much more loyal to anyone who actually does feed them. So this is kind of the mechanic the PCs can use to kind of win these dogs over to their side. And then the second ability I gave them was it's called Guard Dog. And again, I'm not going to be super worried about the specifics of the wording, but basically the idea is just that these dogs can kind of smell outsiders and strangers, and when they do, they're going to bark. And basically, this is just, I don't know if you've ever played kind of like stealth video games where there are certain kind of creatures that can just kind of find you out even when you're kind of in stealth mode. That is kind of what purpose I want these Mastiffs to serve. So if you do end up encountering one of these on the random encounter table, for example, even if you're making use of some of the disguise or stealth mechanics that are kind of present in the adventure, these creatures are still going to they're either going to automatically find you out or have a much higher chance of finding you out. So that's kind of their job. All right, cool. Fantastic. Moving on. All right, so next let's take a look at the baker and butcher. And these are cultists that we're going to encounter in the kitchen area of the dungeon or the temple. I think this is kind of a fun little opportunity to make for a much more interesting kind of encounter and monsters than what we have been designing up to this point. So for the baker, my kind of concept for this guy was that he is a cultist who serves as like the baker for the cult, but he's also like kind of like a standard kind of halfling thief kind of character. Like, your classic, your Bilbo or your Frodo, except he's a member of the cult and he's not a very nice dude. But I think it'd be kind of cool to have him kind of feign innocence, like, oh no, they just, the cult has forced me to work in the kitchens, and they just keep me around because I make such great food. But secretly he's a cultist, and he's going to kind of backstab the characters at the first opportunity, which I think is really exciting. But anyway, in order to turn that kind of concept into like looking at it from a mechanical standpoint, basically what I did is I just took kind of a modified bandit stat line, and then I added the halfling kind of racial ability, which is invisibility, and I've now created this kind of hybrid of the bandit and the halfling. How I imagine this playing out is that the PCs come in, neither the baker nor the butcher have on their cultist robes, because it's too hot in the kitchen to wear your robes, obviously. So if the PCs come in and they're not disguised, the baker is going to, again, feign innocence. He's going to be like, oh no, this orc over here, the butcher, is keeping me captive. Like, please stop him and free me, yada, yada, yada. And then during the fight, when hopefully the PC's attention is focused on the butcher, the baker's going to go invisible using his halfling racial ability, and then he's going to backstab the weakest PC. I think it's kind of a cool concept. So we have given him the toolkit that he needs to achieve that kind of conceptual goal, and I'm just really excited about how this has kind of turned out. And I think that we'll probably have to think about, like, under what circumstances would the PCs be able to figure out that this person is not what they say they are, and we'll try to find some way to telegraph his true loyalty so that they have a chance of not being caught completely off guard. And also, I think it's kind of cool. There's probably going to be flour in this room. He's a baker, and he's like in the process of baking bread. So if we telegraph the existence of kind of flour here, I wonder if maybe the PCs will be like, if they can use it to detect his invisibility or whatever, like dump the flour or throw the flour across the room and find his location before he's able to do some sort of ambush. I think that'd be pretty cool. Then moving on to the butcher, this is going to be an orc, and like conceptually, this guy is like the cult executioner, but he also doubles as the butcher, like in the kitchen when like there's no executions to be doing. So I think that's kind of a fun little concept. I have based him on the orc stat block, so that's a good solid level 1 creature. But I've dialed back the power a little bit. I took away the chainmail and the shield, and I gave him like a leather kind of apron that we're going to count as leather armor. And I think I actually, I bumped up his constitution by 1 as well, giving him a total of 5 hit points. If you'll just excuse a little rant that I have here. In the base Shadowdark rules, for some reason, the base goblin has a +1 modifier to their constitution, but orcs don't. Which means that for some reason goblins have more hit points than orcs do, and I find that sacrilegious. So any adventure that I ever run will have goblins having fewer hit points than orcs, and that's just the way it is. You're gonna have to deal with it. Well, I mean, you don't have to deal with it. You can just change it if you want to. But this is my interpretation of the hierarchy of orcs and goblins. Orcs should be tougher. Goblins should be weaker. That's just the reality of the world that I live in. So I went ahead and made that modification, and I gave this particular orc a +1 bonus to his constitution, giving him a total of 5 hit points, making him a little bit beefier than your standard acolyte level cultist, which these guys are. Other than that, I let him keep his kind of great axe, which is I'm just reflavoring it as a giant meat cleaver. Oh, also the baker has like a rolling pin, but the handle slides out to become like a knife. So it's like a combination of a club and a dagger, which I don't think it really has any mechanical implementation necessarily, but I just thought it was a kind of cool concept that kind of symbolizes what this character is. Like, so on the outside he's like warm and cuddly, and he's a baker and he's got a rolling pin, but then when his true colors show, he like pulls out his knife and he starts stabbing, which I think is just a fun concept. Anyway, back on track. I don't think I made too many other modifications to the orc stat line. I like the orc stat line. I think it's great. But I did reflavor the rage ability, and I'm calling it Meats Back on the Menu as an homage to the I think it's Two Towers, Lord of the Rings Two Towers, Peter Jackson films. I like to put little homages to like pop culture and stuff that I enjoy. I know some people probably don't like that, and if you don't, you can just use it as rage, and it's fine. But I thought it was a funny little kind of Easter egg for people that are familiar with Lord of the Rings. All right, next let's take a look at the Master of Arms character. And conceptually, this guy is kind of the martial leader of the cult. Like, he's the one that's responsible for maintaining the training grounds and training up all the new recruits. So definitely a more martial flavor of cultists. And I was going through and I was looking for what kind of monster would make a good baseline for this character. And I thought Hobgoblin fit really well because they're like more martial types of like goblinoids. And I thought it fit in really nicely with kind of my perception of what this character was going to be. So I don't think that I made significant changes to his stat block. I did replace the Hobgoblin's kind of phalanx ability with some more robust stuff. And this is kind of the flip side of what I've been talking about earlier. Is like we've been reducing the power of kind of like the standard level creatures so that we can offload some of that power onto some of these like special or boss encounters that we're going to fight at various different intervals throughout the dungeon. Commander is supposed to be kind of the replacement for Phalanx. And again, I'm not sure about what the exact wording of this is going to be, but I think like a limited number of times per day, he's going to be able to add a certain number or let people re-roll a missed attack, like any of his allies. This kind of symbolizing his ability to command the other cultists and get them to perform at a higher level than what they would normally be able to do. So that's what that is. I also wanted to give him a mechanical representation of his kind of martial prowess. And I thought the best way to do that would be to give him some like kind of battle master fighter kind of maneuvers, I think they're called in 5th edition. But I didn't want to go overboard and give him like a ton. So I just stayed with disarm and shove. Disarm is basically just going to be that it's kind of like as part of his attack if he hits. I think it might be like a dexterity check to avoid dropping your weapon, and then we'll just have like picking up your weapon again. We'll just have that be an action. So it would essentially waste someone's turn, quote unquote, if they get disarmed. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable and relatively easy to implement kind of martial maneuver. So I like that quite a bit. And then the other one I wanted to do was shove. And I think this is like push you back like close 5 feet and then knock you down prone. And then once you're prone, attacks against you probably have advantage. And I think to make it easy, we'll probably just say it takes your entire movement to stand back up again. And that is more powerful than it is in kind of 5th edition, but I think this is a perfectly reasonable maneuver for kind of like an elite or boss monster to have. So I think we're going to keep it at that. Also, I'm thinking about that in the training grounds. I'm pretty sure that well, I know that there's going to be a fighting pit in the training grounds where 2 of the captured villagers are kind of being forced to battle it out to see which one is going to live and which one's going to die. And I want to integrate that into the battle in some way. So I want to give the man-at-arms the ability to knock people down into the fighting pit in a very explicit way in the text. So the DMs are like, "Ooh, this is a cool idea." So PCs will need to be careful about how they position, or else the master-at-arms will be able to knock them into the pit, and they'll take additional d6 and falling damage or whatever. And this is also kind of foreshadowing for an ability that I want to give to the cult leader, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it also involves moving people around and being conscious of where they're standing relative to terrain. So I'm pretty happy with the Master-at-Arms. All right, so next here I want to look at the Mistress of Pain. And this was originally going to be like kind of the cult inquisitor character that was going to be located in kind of the torture chamber or the halls of pain. But during the course of kind of looking up some of the artwork that's available for kind of like cultist looking characters, I came across this really awesome piece of like a female drow with a snake whip. And like how am I not going to use that in the adventure? Just like, it's such a great piece of art. It's super evocative. It's kind of different. And I think it makes for a really cool looking kind of elite or boss encounter. So like, again, like how am I just not going to use this? So I changed the fiction from being kind of like your standard culty inquisitor person to this drow with the snake whip. So very excited about that. In terms of the stat block, I use a modified version of the standard drow stat block, but then I gave her the drow priestess kind of snake whip ability, or like a variation on it. And that's really exciting to me. So I don't think there's anything too crazy here in terms of changes that I made. I can't remember actually, but yeah, it's basically a snake whip, and it has a chance to paralyze you if you get hit with it, which I think is very like cool and on brand for like type of an inquisitor type of character. So again, I'm really happy that I stumbled across that piece of art, and it's a really cool example of how art can be so inspirational and kind of when it comes to the design process. I just think that's a really cool interplay of concepts. So it was cool to see that. All right, so finally, let's take a look at the cult leader, which I am currently calling Dark Apostle Moloch, but we may workshop the name. So this is kind of going to be our ultimate kind of final boss for the adventure, if the PCs choose to go this far and not just kind of leave earlier. And to kind of set up the encounter a little bit, the cult leader is going to be in the ritual chamber along with probably like 4 or so acolytes, and they're going to be in the middle of a ritual where they're in the process of using kind of dark magic to convert 3 to 5 of the strongest villagers, try to convert them to the cult. Forgot to turn my light on. Amateur, rookie mistake. That's fine. Where were we? So cult leader, 4 acolytes. We'll just say 4 of the stronger villagers are in the process of being kind of mind controlled, and the PCs are kind of interrupting this ritual when they stumble into the room. And then also another confounding or complicating factor is that there's going to be like a river of caustic blood going around the outside of the room, and if you get knocked into that, you're going to take like probably like 1d4 to 1d6 environmental damage. So PCs need to be careful about how they're orienting themselves relative to Moloch in the fight. So for the base creature for this, I wanted to find a level 4 humanoid that was like a good fit. There were a couple different choices. I finally settled on the goblin boss as kind of a template for this. I don't imagine Moloch as being a goblin. He's probably human orc or half orc. Conceptually, and also because I found some pretty cool art, which I'll show on the screen for what I think that Moloch might look like, and it doesn't look like a goblin to me. It looks like a kind of a taller humanoid. But anyway, I used the goblin boss stat block with some modifications. I also want to give him a magical weapon, probably like a +1 longsword or bastard sword. It's going to bump up his attack bonus and damage by 1, which is going to be probably pretty terrifying for the PCs. I might have changed some of the stats a little bit. I think I probably upped the charisma because this is a cult leader, so I imagine he's a pretty charismatic dude. And he's pretty tough. So this is going to be a pretty challenging encounter for the PCs. It's going to be a deadly encounter. You know, their best bet may just be like kind of get the prisoners and try to make a run for it, maybe, or try to convince the villagers to stick around and try to fight against Moloch and his cultists. But it's not going to be an easy fight by any means. But in terms of the abilities that I wanted Moloch to have, there were 2 that immediately came to mind, and I see him as kind of like, you know, he's this hyper charismatic individual. I guess he's kind of like Thulsa Doom, actually, a little bit from Conan. I didn't make that connection until just now, but that is he's like this cult leader who's kind of martially focused, and he's also got some powerful like mind control kind of stuff going on, and then some other stuff as well. An obsession with kind of not flesh, but like blood magic. So that's kind of an interesting parallel. Anyway, the abilities that I am imagining for him are the convert ability, which is basically just kind of like a mind control or a charm. And he'll be using this on the villagers that are kind of restrained and turning them against the PCs. And then we'll also have to make some sort of mechanic for the PCs or maybe the other villagers to kind of talk these converted villagers down and try to bring them back to, you know, a non-hypnotized or mind controlled state. So that's like one major ability that I wanted to have. And then I want to give him kind of like a bloodbender kind of feel from Avatar. That was my original inspiration, was like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like bloodbending, which is I don't know if it's technically mind control, but it's like body control, and then also moving people around basically with using bloodbending. And that's represented in this Sanguine Grip ability, which I guess is also kind of like the Death Knight ability from World of Warcraft. But basically this allows him to either push or pull someone up to a near distance, so like 30 feet, and also knock them prone in the same way as kind of the Mastered Arms abilities kind of work, just on it's not a close range. It's like, it's much further out than adjacent. And he can either use this to knock people down and then get advantage on his sword attacks, or he can knock people into that kind of caustic river of blood for some environmental damage and some just additional like crowd control kind of effects as they spend a turn like trying to pull themselves out of the river of blood. And I just think that all these elements are going to come together in a way that's going to hopefully create a very interesting and dynamic fight. But I am also now thinking like this is a lot of elements involved in one fight, so I'm going to have to be really careful about how I structure and lay this fight out. I really want to, like, I'm not going to make it this complicated if I can't fit it on a 2-page spread, like all the information you need to run the encounter on a 2-page spread. So that'll create some boundaries for us in terms of just how complicated this encounter can be. But if we're able to get even just some of these elements into the encounter, I think it's going to be really fun. So I'm looking forward to running this. Anyway, I feel like we've been going for a very, very long time. So yeah. But yeah, this is what we got. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed the video. If so, please check out the other Shadowdark design related videos that will be popping up on your screen very shortly. Yeah, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.